afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the next webinar in the ISO 37000 series. I'm really looking forward to today and having this conversation. Of course, I've got the two queens of corporate governance online. We have Carolynn Chalmers here. She wears very many hats and she plays a very important role on the international stage in corporate governance. And, you know, she is an absolute expert when it comes to ISO 37000 today, because she was part of the team that actually created, wrote, drafted this document. I know there's very specific words that you need to use. So, Carolynn, you can correct me. So welcome, Carolynn. Before I hand over to you, I'm also very, very happy to introduce Advocate Annamarie van Merwe. She is the Executive Chair of FluidRock, and in her own right, she also plays a very important role on the corporate governance stage. She used to be part of the King Committee. She was there for the first King, when it was just King, then King 2, King 3, King 4. And she is also playing on what I would almost say the other side of a board, which is being a non-executive director. She is of a listed entity, Pick n Pay, and she also is a chair for very many boards. And she really advises a lot of companies on corporate governance and helping them. So today we are, so welcome, Annamarie. So today we are really going to get into some of the nitty-gritty of the technical areas of ISO 37000. But before we kick off, I just want to let you know that we actually have a lot of people attending today, and it's on a wide range of the scale. We have people who have done the ISO 37000 course that we offer at FluidRock, who are busy, who has to write their exams. Guys, don't delay, just do it. Set a date and write your exam. And then we have people who are implementing ISO 37000 in their companies. And we have people who are just joining today to see what is all of this about. So we are trying to cater for everyone. So what we're going to kick off with, and if I can hand over to Carolynn, is to say, you know, what have been, things are changing so fast. What are the developments in the area? And if Carolynn, if you don't mind, maybe you can just expand a little bit, you know, outside of ISO 37000 as well, just what's happening on the international stage on corporate governance at the moment.
Thanks so much, Ronelle. It's really wonderful to be here today, and thank you for everyone for attending today. I think just starting off with 37000, we've recently had the ISO Technical Committee meetings, plenary meeting. There are lots and lots of standards that are being developed around 37000, using 37000 as its basis. We also have, so for example, the indicators of good governance. Of course, people on the call might know about the developing standard is the governance maturity model, ISO 37004, which is now in a draft international standard and about to be published as a final draft. In a final draft, essentially, there's just editorial changes, but technically the standard is there. So we've got technical international consensus on what a governance maturity model looks like for ISO 37000. So we've got two measurement instruments that are coming out now surrounding 37000. Maybe just to put it into financial terms, when you have the income statement and the balance sheet, one is a specific point in time, and the other one gives the change in the organization over time, kind of a going concern feel. So the indicators, the governance indicator standard that's being developed, that's ISO 37006, is essentially a point in time. What are the indicators? What indicators should we use to indicate the governance of this organization? So really as a point in time versus a governance maturity model that gives a longer term perspective. How is the governance changing in this organization over time? How is it improving? How is it keeping pace with what needs to be applied in this organization, this particular organization? Maybe just to say, one of the questions that I'm often asked is if it's not a certifiable standard, which it's not, and please don't let anyone say that it is certifiable. The only thing that can be certified is an individual's certified understanding of the standard, which is what this ISO 37000 FluidRock course does. It gives the only certification of learning and understanding, around 37,000. So the organization, just to reiterate, can't be certified. So how do stakeholders know whether this organization's been well governed according to ISO 37,000? And the guidance is in the standard itself. And that's in terms of disclosures on an apply and explain basis. So just as we have with, you mentioned the King codes, we have the same approach in terms of the ISO 37,000, which says that the organization, the governing body of the organization, should disclose, first of all, that what conditions it has established to create the environment for the organization's governance. So those are in clause 4 of ISO 37,000. Those are the governance conditions that we talk about in terms of the governing body itself, but also integrated governance in the organization. And then, of course, the principles, and then explaining how those principles have been applied in the particular organization by the governing body. So we know that every single organization is different, just like every single person in the world is different. So we need to understand as stakeholders how those principles are being applied. If ISO 37,000, and now I'm shifting into the next context, is if a country is adopting ISO 37,000 and an organization wants to comply with a regulation that says, the regulation says you have to apply ISO 37,000, what we're talking about there is the compliance requirement to adopt every single one of the 11 principles in ISO 37,000. It's still up to the organization to explain how they're applying those principles, and it's up to stakeholders to apply their minds in reading and interpreting that information. Of course, the outer circle, as we see in ISO 37,000, are the governance outcomes. And those governance outcomes, the 3 governance outcomes, are really the indicator that an organization is being well governed. And those governance outcomes are assessments essentially of the organization, not of the governing body. And of those 3 are, is the organization stewarding its resources responsibly? So responsible stewardship. Is the organization performing effectively? Effective performers? And is the organization demonstrating effective ethical leadership? So yes, absolutely. In the manual, in the training, there's the blue circle on the outside, the governance outcomes. So those are the indicators of whether an organization is being well governed or not, applying the principles in ISO 37,000, are those 3 governance outcomes. Now, at a country level, if you're mandating that ISO 37,000 is required in terms of a compliance requirement, it's the 11 principles that you're complying with. And then the practices are to an organization's, the governing body's interpretation of how they want to apply those principles in their organization. At a country level, we often see, and I'm involved in helping 4 countries around the world, adopting ISO 37,000 as their country standard, and thereafter applying a specific country, let's say, imperatives. So if we think about South Africa as an example, and just comparing the ISO 37,000 with the King Code, which is very uniquely South African code written within the context of South Africa's legislation. Of course, the principles can be applied generically, but very much in the South African legislation. We see that King 4 has got 3 principles on ethics. And that's because the country has recognized that ethics is an issue when it comes to the governance of an organization. So we don't see 3 principles. We see 1 principle on leadership in ISO 37,000 that talks about ethical and effective leadership. So one would expect, if South Africa adopts ISO 37,000 as its King equivalent, that you would see not only 1 principle on ethics, but you would see an emphasis of additional principles beyond the 11 principles that focus on ethics. Another example is in South Africa, we have one of the worst Gini coefficients in the world, the difference between the haves and the have-nots. So you would expect to have a principle around remuneration, to bring equitable remuneration, perhaps also around racial diversity, given the history of South Africa. So those are the kinds of principles that you'd want to see over and above these 11 principles, but using the 11 principles as the starting point, as the almost the lowest common denominator. And that's what we're doing in all the countries around the world in adopting ISO 37000 as the lowest common denominator, and then putting the real bespoke requirements for every country on top of that, so that we get a country specific. So I guess that's a change that we're seeing around the world in the adoption. South Africa has adopted ISO 37000 as a South African national standard now. It was adopted in January. So it is equivalent of a King report. Of course, it's not. The King report has been adopted as a compliance requirement in various regulations and the stock exchange, for example. So there's no option. It's King 4 as opposed to 37,000. But certainly for organizations that aren't defined through regulation, we are adopting, you have the ability to adopt ISO 37000 as it stands. So
Okay.
that's in terms of the changes in the environment. Yes.
Yes,
I'm going to stop there.
Yes, because I know that you're going to continue, but maybe I can just take a breather here and just say, Annamarie, please come in if you've got any questions or observations as well.
Yeah, so thank you. Good afternoon from my side as well. Firstly, let me say and apologize for the quality of my video. I'm not in my normal setting. I'm supposedly on leave and currently find myself in the Hoedspruit Wildlife Estate. So I was saying to Carolynn earlier, it's the first time I feel that I can I'm on par with her being based in Cape Town when it comes to surroundings, and being able to kind of brag a little bit. And for those of you not South African based, I'm like on the border of the Kruger National Park and surrounded by the African bush, but that brings its own challenges when it comes to technology and infrastructure as well. So please bear with me. And Ronelle, if my sound goes a little bit wobbly, let me know, then I'll rather keep quiet. I don't want to irritate any of the panelists or of the attendees. But I think, Carolynn, thank you for that opening just kind of perspective that you're giving. And listening to what you're saying, there's one kind of common theme that I think personally, if we take a little bit of practical approach and to this, is one of the real challenges that we find. We do lots of board evaluations, and the one kind of a perception I 9 out of 10 times walk away with is the fact that board members who are not on the same page. They have different kind of understanding of what governance is, number one, whether it's relevant for their organization, and if so, kind of in what, what does it look, should it look like? Yet, when we do this, I was saying to somebody this morning, talking to the company secretary on a board where we're doing board evaluation, I said to her, again, I was like wondering whether your board members serve on the same board. It's just, I just get such a diverse kind of approach to whether they think something is good or not so good, or, we're walking on water, kind of very diverse opinions that they have. But and with your, you will know what I'm talking about. With your help in the kind of consumer goods industry, we recently did a program for them as an industry, because they were looking at kind of collating information on what they're doing in the sustainability, ESG space, etc., and good governance. And they were hoping, that would be an easy task. And then you quite rightly pointed out that people are not on the same page when it is what should be measured. We can't compare apples with apples. So let's help you on this journey to, first of all, make sure that we all, are talking the same language, we referring, to the same thing. And that's why it was good. I think that today's focus is a little bit on the definitions, the terminology that we started. But I really want to say, and I would love to hear kind of your views on this. I still am fairly despondent, and maybe just because of what I get exposed to in the on a practical level, on a daily basis in the kind of work we do. I still get despondent with this kind of lack of really getting it. So we're lacking the buy-in, that people understand the why. Then even if you have the buy-in, they do understand the why, how and the what seems to, there seems to be a very diverse view as to how it should be done in an organization and who should drive it. And. So, yeah, I've worked, I'd love to hear what your views are on that.
Okay, so thanks for that, Annamarie, and we will definitely watch the quality. So I think just before we move on back to Carolynn, is if any of the attendees have a question or a query or a comment, please feel free to put it into the chat. And if you have some practical experience with something, please give us some more information. It's always very, very interesting. So Carolynn, I think what I'm taking out also from your first few comments or first information is that basically 37,000 will continue developing. We have 2 new measurements and things are developing, and I'm sure you got a feedback loop from business as well. And this will help a lot, especially to be able to measure your materiality, because that's always a difficult one. And what I also found very interesting from what you have said is that, countries apply this, companies apply this, and then individuals can be certified. So what we have, it is very much what is applicable in your environment. What do you have to highlight and bring to the fore? If something doesn't come out as strongly in ISO 37000, you might want to really emphasize it as an additional item, regardless if you're a country, if you are a company, and that I found very interesting. And then especially if you are a multinational operating in very many jurisdictions, you are probably also going to map all the different requirements as the countries start accepting this.
Yep, absolutely. I'm not sure of the question. Is there a question to me?
I think I'm also almost like just observing from a practical point on what you're saying, which I find very interesting. And I think that is very important for all our attendees to know, is that ISO is not something that you take and then tick boxes. It's almost to say, what of these are really important for us and how do we apply it? And that links back to Annamarie's comment about, are we on the same board? Are we on the same page? So that's almost where to start, is do we think these principles apply to us, and what do we think is missing based on our context? That's how I would take it. So Carolynn, please, I interrupted you. Please continue with
No problem.
New developments. Okay.
Yes, sure. To Annamarie and your points, I think one issue is actually quite interesting. If you think about learning, and you need to learn, and you go to these training courses as a board member or new board member, and if you think about the Bloom's taxonomy of learning and your children learning, the very bottom level, the very first ability to learn is the ability to recall. So if you ask any board member in South Africa or around the world, what are the 11 principles of ISO 37000? Isn't that just a recall? The very, very basic level of learning. So how many people on the call today, it'll be quite interesting to see if you put in the chat function, how many people, if you are a director, you can recall the 11 principles of ISO 37000, because that's the very first step of learning. After that, you can start understanding what it means, you can start applying, you can start being innovative around it and how you apply it. Those are all higher end levels of learning, but are we actually still crawling when it comes to governance? And my sense in working with boards is we are. Most directors, many directors, maybe let me be not so harsh on it, many directors still today cannot recall the principles that they should be applying as directors, whether you are applying the King principles or the UK corporate governance code or whatever principles, that you actually can recall those principles. So first step in learning, and maybe then to your point around what else is happening. So we've been for many years understanding that G is part of the GRC stack, so the governance, risk, and compliance, that governance works hand in hand with risk and compliance. So governance is what you should be doing, risk is what, and compliance is what you must be doing, and then risk is what would happen if you don't or if you do. So risk and opportunity. So those three have, for many years now, we've understood that those three work hand in hand. But what we're seeing today is this concept of ESG. So all of these acronyms, so we've got the GRC, we've kind of unpacked that, this governance, risk, and compliance. How does that align now with ESG, the environment, social, and governance? And really the ESG factors came through from the investor world that were recognizing that more and more of their decisions, when their investment decisions, had to be based on, can we say, intangible assets. So not the financial report, the tangible, but actually the intangible. And we can think about that as brand and reputation and things like that. But really more and more it started becoming, it's the environmental factors and it's the social factors and it's the governance factors. So they coined this term ESG, but it really means those intangible sustainability factors in an organization. So in today's world, there's still, this partisan debate around ESG and sustainability that actually mean the same thing. It's the sustainability of the organization, and from an investor's perspective, it's those intangibles that we need to consider. So very much G is now being brought into the sustainability of the organization, and rightly so. Without effective governance of an organization, we have Lehman Brothers, Enron. We can just name them in every country. They just roll off the tongue as these large governance failures. And that talks to the heart of the sustainability of an organization, as do environmental factors such as climate change now. Obviously in South Africa, it's the power utilities, it's the water, it's those kinds of basic utilities. But you have in Northern Hemisphere, in developed countries, you have floods, you have droughts, you've got fires in Canada. So all of these things are having an impact on the sustainability of an organization. And then if we go back to brand and reputation, of course, that is a social factor. That is society accepting you as an organization. It's your brand and your reputation sits in your social and relational capital, so to speak. So we cannot think of G outside of GRC. The three hang together. And likewise, today we cannot think of G as outside of sustainability. It's very much part and parcel of the sustainability of an organization. ESG, you might want to call it. So, oh, sorry, Carla. Yes, load shedding. We're just talking about that now. So just to think a little bit broader, as you were saying, the G in context. And now the international sustainability standards are being published and being rolled out. In June, we will see the ISSB standards. Now, for those who don't know the acronym ISSB, some people call it ISB. Essentially, the International Financial Reporting Standards, as we know, is IFRS. People have either adopted IFRS, IFRS reporting, or in the US, it's the GAAP reporting, but we've adopted the International Accounting Standards of IFRS generally in 167 jurisdictions around the world. IFRS reporting. Now, what IFRS has done is they've said we're not only adopting international accounting standards, and there's been this huge consolidation of accounting standards over the last 70, 100 years, we're also adopting sustainability standards. And those sustainability standards are absolutely required for every organization around the world, because we need to understand, remember the intangible, tangible, we need to understand not only the tangible financial, but also the intangible sustainability information. So very, very big month next month for the International Sustainability Standards Boards, the ISSB, as they produce their the first drafts of their ISSB Sustainability Standards Disclosures, S1 and S2. And that will then, for every organization in the world where the country has adopted IFRS, will then be looking at adopting sustainability reporting standards. That's really important because it's a first step in sustainability reporting, which is the first step in ESG reporting. So there we have the bigger picture, that we're getting mandated reporting requirements for governance in every organization around the world. very important change is coming in June. And I think that's a bigger perspective to what you were talking about, Ronelle. Yeah, I think that really gives some perspective.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. I mean, if I can just share my screen again and then maybe just put it in practical terms. Let me just see. How am I gonna just close this one? Sorry, I'm struggling with my laptop here. Okay, so I mean, I don't know if you've been watching the Adidas unfolding the story. They signed up with Kanye West in 2013, 2014 because Nike wouldn't pay him royalties. So then basically Adidas said that they would distribute some of his goods and sign him up as a brand ambassador. And then, I mean, they sold 9,000 pairs of shoes in 10 minutes. It's called Yeezy shoes. And it's incredible. I mean, but then, you know, this apparel has been going for billions a year. And now recently, Adidas has dropped Kanye West as a brand ambassador because basically he made some inappropriate comments, anti-Semitic comments. He also wore a White Lives Matter shirt. A White Lives Matter shirt, and at the Paris fashion show, and he said, "I can make anti-Semitic comments, and Adidas won't drop me." So then Adidas dropped him. Okay, now they're sitting with about 1.2 billion rand worth of stock that they can't sell, or that they were struggling to sell, and they didn't know what to do with it. So the previous CEO got a golden parachute of almost 15 million euros, and they replaced him with an executive from Puma, who's coming from Puma, who Puma's doing very well, and he didn't get any kind of parachute or payout. And they are now going to sell all this Yeezy apparel for, I don't know if for discounts, but they're going to sell it and then donate the money to charity. So they're not going to give it to charity, because I think if you sell and donate, you actually get a tax benefit. So that's my personal view on that. But if you think about it, and now Adidas has announced that they're not going to replace him as a brand ambassador with some other person. They're actually going back to their purpose. So if you think about it, if Adidas just said, what is our core purpose? How do we generate value? And they exercise proper oversight and accountability, then that could really have worked. And now the investors of Adidas is suing Adidas, not Kanye West, but Adidas, because they are saying that they did not disclose to their shareholders the risks involved with Kanye West. So there you have, let me call it almost responsible stewardship. You've got effective performance, because now Adidas is for the first time in 31 years making a loss, and they're going to make a 700 million, or they have made a $700 million loss. So it's very easy to apply ISO to real life environments, or as a little bit of a post-mortem. But what we're trying to do is we're saying ISO should be in your company, because it will actually prevent you from having to face similar things to as Adidas. And I think that's really what you're saying. And you're saying life is going to be a bit broader. Look out for ISB, because there's going to be reporting requirements. When people have to report in time, they improve, right? But I mean,
that's right. Accountability. We're setting up accountability.
You're setting up accountability because people are now in the spotlight, right?
Yeah,
that's very interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. Annamarie, I just want to also see if you want to add something or your observations about what Carolynn has said.
I want to thank Ronelle. I was quickly responding to the question on the Q&A about slides, saying there isn't slides. There was just your ISO 37000 framework, which you were just showing. But Carolynn, just so you know, the conversation and the example that Ronelle just showed on, spoke about on Adidas, which obviously a large listed organization, it reports widely. But when you were talking about the ISSB, reporting framework that's coming out, and earlier on in your first remarks, you were talking about stakeholders. You were saying, you know what, it's not for regulatory bodies to get involved, stakeholdership. And the thought that crossed my mind when I was listening to you was, again, and I sound like the negative one on the podcast, which is not my usual style. But as I said, maybe I'm just being kind of, in a negative mode after I've seen what I've seen now with board evaluations. But that companies that do not report report at a, not kind of international listed large organizations. So many of those also, how do that kind of communication with stakeholders, how do we help them? How do we take ISSB and help them to even if it's internal reporting, because Ronelle can tell you a lot about what we come across with internal reporting. Just let's talk a little bit about the stakeholders and the reporting part.
Yes, very interesting. So how do we make sure, and I've been so exposed to this, is that the board doesn't give to the finance team, the reporting team, fill out your plan, explain on governance, and we will, how are we doing it? You fill it out in terms of how we're doing it. We'll sign off on it. We'll oversee what you're reporting on our behalf. Of course, that flies in the face of governance, because governance is about not delegating those things that you're actually responsible for and accountable for at the end of the day. You can certainly delegate in terms of support, but when it says that the board should, the governing body should, actually the governing body should, not the governing body should delegate this thing that they should be doing. So that is interesting. So when boards, how do you get boards to actually think about how they are applying principles? In ISO 37004, the governance maturity model, we have 3 aspects that we are looking at measuring. So it's not, or evaluating. It's not only the tick box, that you have got this kind of policy and that kind of policy. And that is really the only real measure that is reported on at the moment is, are you doing this, that, and the other thing? Yes, no, yes, no. That's really what's reported on, but we know that that's not enough. We know that good governance needs good behavior. We just have a look at the Steinhoff case that's going through the German courts now, where they had the who's who of governance on their board and the board committees, and they could tick every box that you could possibly want, and still there was a huge governance failure. And the governance failures really stem at poor behavior, as opposed to, all the boxes are ticked. And that's why we need to understand that governance has to be principle-based and not compliance-based. That's why the standard is not certifiable. It is it's application, it's guidance, because it's really lands on behavior. So how do you change and shift that behavior? Well, that is a difficult one, and it's something that I was asked just the other day around how do you incentivize people to do the right thing? And I go back to the traditional stick and carrot. So what is the big stick? Well, the big stick is disclosure, is penalties, is performance, performance penalties, etc. But it's very hard to pin that down on a board of directors. It's always after the failure. It's always after the failure has been to the detriment of the entire company, after the directors then have been sued or the company's been sued, etc. So, the big stick really is ineffective for promoting good governance. So it has to come down to the carrot. So what is the carrot? And this is where in integrated reporting, we have the Integrated Reporting Awards. We are starting to see a few good governance awards, those kinds of promoting what does good governance look like. Here is a person, this is what good governance looks like. But we're so hesitant to do it because there's so many factors involved in what a well-governed governing body looks like. And it's so tailored for the organization at hand. It's very difficult, but we would like to show those directors that are and those boards that are doing well and align that to the results of the organization. And I think the only way that we can do that is, and it doesn't exist today, is to start measuring through stakeholder surveys those 3 governance outcomes. To do stakeholder surveys of, do you believe that this organization is stewarding its resources responsibly, etc., and use that as a carrot for improvement. A little bit of a stick, peer pressure, etc., but a carrot for improvement. What we don't want to see which is what we tend to see happening with these awards. I'm just thinking about the Miss World, Miss Universe kind of awards, is that there's a whole science behind how to win these. Actually, these awards are about, and these showcases are about making sure that we know what it looks like, and that we're trying to bring the carrot into good governance. I don't have the answer. I mean, how do you push a piece of string up the hill?
So I do think, if you really think about it, the reward for good governance is longevity, in a sustainable way. And that is, it's as if, the good companies out there, you're not going to get into the media necessarily for your good governance, right? Because media do revolve around the sensationalism. But if you think about in your everyday life with your company, it's like, it's really about the governance journey. It's about what's important and linking that to what's important for the stakeholders. But I like your idea of a governance survey. And I thought it's very good at this point to maybe just check if Annamarie knows the 11 principles. No, I was just joking. No.
I just want to say sorry, Ronel, I've just lost connectivity. Sorry.
No speaker English.
No.
That's what colleagues do. You throw each other under the bus every now and again for entertainment value. No, but I mean, I do think, Carolynn, these standards, if I can come back to it, when are they being released? The maturity one and
So the maturity one will be towards the end of this year or early next year. And then the indicators is still quite far, there's still quite a lot of work that needs to be done. The reason why it's 37,006 is because, first of all, they needed a standard on how to set indicators, let alone indicators for governance. So 37,005 is a standard on setting indicators. And then we have indicators specifically for the governance of an organization. So that's why we've had the wheels spinning a little bit. And also there's, indicators include things like the term well-being. Wow. If you ever want a term, and we're going to get to terms now, if you ever want a term that's so hotly debated, what is well-being for Brazil and Argentina is certainly not what well-being means for Germany and Norway. So, this term well-being has really riled up the experts in TC 309 and the technical committee talking about these terms. But I know that one of the terms that's been quite difficult in the standard is this concept of an organization, and that really starts with the definition. But I'm not sure if you want to get onto that now, Ronel.
Absolutely. I mean, this is what we really wanted to get to. And for our attendees, this is where it's going to get a little bit technical. I'll try and screen. What I'm screening is not slides. It's really extract of our manual of the ISO 37000 course, but you can find it also in the standard. The standard we're not allowed to distribute because it is copyrighted by the International Standards Organization. So I'll screen that, but maybe after the session to the attendees, I can do 2 slides just to send to you what I can, and then just make sure the copyright and everything is sorted properly. So please do. So Carolynn, because there's a lot of terms that's very confusing, and really today we wanted to touch on some of them. So please, if you can help and elaborate on that.
Sure. Thanks, Ronel. I think the first thing is to note that because South Africa has adopted ISO 37000 as a South African national standard, so that's a SANS, S-A-N-S, it's moved from 3,000 Rand down to 300 Rand. So and if your country is adopting these standards, it becomes priced according to your country requirements as opposed to the Swiss franc, which is rather expensive for us developing countries. So just to say that, and if you have a look in the standard, you'll see that there's under the terms and definitions just above that, I thought it would be quite important to talk about 2 normative references. And it says there are no normative references in this document. Now, what does a normative reference mean? It means that everything in that standard applies to this standard. So ISO 37000 doesn't have any normative references. It means that no other standards this should not be read does not need to be read in conjunction with other standards. There's no other standards that are influencing this standard. But the reason why I wanted to raise that is because ISO 37004, the governance maturity model, has this standard as a normative reference, because what you're doing is you're trying to do a governance maturity model on the basis of 37,000. It's not on the basis of King 4 and whatever other standards. It's on the basis of ISO 37,000. So when we publish 37,004, you would see under normative references ISO 37,000. And it also means that none of the terms and definitions in ISO 37,000 are repeated in ISO 37,004, even though the terms are used in 37,004. So that's quite important, that if you look under normative references, if you do have any normative references, all of the terms and definitions of those references also apply to this document. So then if we just jump into maybe the first term, which is actually quite hotly debated, and it was hotly debated in the expert consensus building in the technical committee. And did you lose me? Am I there? Okay. Is governance, okay, governance of organizations. And importantly, it says that the governance of organizations is a human-based system by which an organization is directed, overseen, and held accountable for achieving its defined purpose. And I emphasize that it's a human-based system. This was hotly debated because there was this consideration of an AI bot becoming a director. It's certainly considered as maybe unbiased, no conflicts of interest, blah, blah, blah. But we felt that the concept of an organization was developed by society for society. So it's a human-based construct. We even call an organization a juristic person when it's incorporated under law. It's a juristic person. So we are emphasizing that the governance of an organization has to be done by people. Doesn't mean that we can't use AI and ChatGPT, etc., to support us, but it has to be done by people. So we're not getting away from a board of directors being anything other than people. And maybe that's something I'd ask Annamarie about, and you, Ronelle, as well, is are you getting AI, chat, GPT, etc., these AI tools starting to, get used at a boardroom level?
Annamarie, do you want to go? What's very interesting is that AI has definitely been spoken about at board level for a long time. I don't think it's being used as much. I do think it's being used in some of the modeling of some of the papers that we are seeing coming to the board, but I think it's going to take us by storm, and it's going to be quite quick. And I actually wrote an article when maybe 2014 on the robot director. There's a robot director that's been in place in Hong Kong for quite a while. And it's
that was the one we were arguing about.
Yes, that's one you've been arguing about. And it's very interesting because that didn't take off. I mean, I thought it would take off, but I do think that there is this element still in boards that decisions can be made best by humans, which is debatable, which I'm sure why you've debated it. So I think what will be good is if we see that technology is there to be harnessed, and then you always have a value judgment by a human. So this is a very important, I think, element that you have here, that it's a human-based system, and that the arms and legs of an organization is still the humans, even if it's not incorporated.
Yeah, absolutely. Annamarie, have you seen anything?
Not just, I think Ronelle, Ronelle is our technical fourth industrial revolution specialist. So I kind of try and keep out of those conversations. As I say, I mean, I do tables in Word. I can't even do Excel, Carolynn. So I'm probably really not the one to respond to it. But I do think that kind of more from an innovation, R&D perspective, it's on the table. But I think there's very little appreciation or understanding that it may even really bring itself into the boardroom. to Ronald's point, through board submissions, etc. So I think that penny still has to drop with many boards.
Yeah. And I think the implication of saying human-based, and one of the governance conditions in 37,000 is integrated governance. That means that you also should be depending on humans to be able to inform the board. And that's going to be a huge shift, because what we see today is generally executives reporting to the board tend to give fact and not a lot of opinion, because there's a hesitation to provide opinion. Now, AI can absolutely give fact, and there's interpreted fact, but what we're looking for from humans is this value judgments, these opinions. In your opinion, what do you see coming down the line? That you've seen this confluence of events. You're steeped in the day-to-day activities. That has to change when it comes to the governance of organization. We have to grow up and culturally in our organizations to request of our executives, those who are reporting to the governing body, to provide their opinion, because the facts are more easily obtained these days. It's all automated systems, etc. So the facts are there, take it as read, we can interrogate the facts, but really why we are paying people to report to us is to give us their value judgments, their interpretation, their opinions. And that's going to be the consequence of this definition of a human-based system and the requirement for an integrated governance approach. Renal, I see you off mute. Do you want to say something?
I think you must write a standard on reporting, maybe, that could be ISO 37012 or something. So I just wanted to add on to that. You're saying opinions, but what we're seeing a lot with board reporting is that people are taking data and giving information, which is the second level order of information, So then it's maybe it is data that is now just organized in a table. Then what I think is not done is that I don't think there's a really formal way where people are really taught to expand on information. So you want to get to an opinion. So then you actually have to take it to knowledge, which is your next step, which is then to say, okay, I'm linking the dots. But then after knowledge, and this is maybe one from your board, is where you take it to wisdom. So I do think what's happening a lot is that just data, because a lot of times information that's given to the board is done very last minute. And then you just get the basics, and you are expecting your board to extrapolate wisdom from knowledge, which is basically raw data organized. So, or it's from information actually. So that you made a very, very important point. It's that give us your opinion, and then that opinion has to be valued. But so coming back to our organization or our human-based or that definition, I mean, you've said you debated it quite a bit, and so it's absolutely what we want to make clear is that this is not saying we're not harnessing technology. Absolutely not. We are saying that if in ISO 37000, we are saying an organization is a human-based system that's maybe supported by technology, or you're in a technology industry. It's just we are humans, and we're not going to say we're AI or robots. And I think now it's very, very valid, because I don't think you foresaw the whole chat GPT rage that's going on when you wrote the standard. But this must give quite a lot of validation, right?
Yes, absolutely. Back in 2017, I was already giving guidance to boards on governance policies around AI and basing it on the Asilomar principles that Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk back in those days, and all of those guys were involved in drafting. So that was 2017 already. So it has been a long time coming, but of course now it's just exploding. Just speaking about AI, my kids showed me this Gandalf.ai, and Gandalf really is about asking Gandalf. Gandalf knows the password, and you have to ask Gandalf questions and for him to tell you the password. And I really, that's got to be the epitome of you teaching hackers how to hack, how to guess your password. I mean, if you're playing that game, you teaching people, the AI, how to guess your passwords. I mean, really, we have to be so careful of this, and this is where the humanness comes in. We also, I think, as the wisdom you're talking about, Ronel, is that there's lots we can do. I mean, with the technologies available to us today, it's just so much that we can do. The wisdom comes in, should we? You can do it, should you? And I think that's the wisdom that must sit with the board. So what management need to tell us is whether we can do it or we can't do it, and what the risks are, to your point right in the beginning, what the associated risks are with the Kanye West story. But should we? So, and that's the wisdom that needs to come through.
Carolynn, it's in that should we, where, to your point that you raised earlier on, where the values come in. And I think that's where the human element is so important, because we do make those judgments based on our inherent moral compass and values, you know, and which is critical, I do believe, you know, will remain critical for many years, and which I do not think can be replicated. Maybe not now, who knows what the future holds, but it can't really be replicated in a machine.
Absolutely. Maybe just a last point on that governance of organizations definition. You will also notice that it doesn't emphasize, it's not about the governing body. Yes, it says direct and whatever, but it's not about the governing body. It's about the organization. It is a very much an organizational focused definition. Whereas in King 4, it's about effective and ethical leadership by the governing body, blah, blah, blah. It's the governing body focused leadership. But ISO 37000, it's about the organization and achieving the organization's purpose. So that's why one of the criticisms that came through from ISO 37000, or the comments, the feedback, was it doesn't tell the board what to do. It doesn't tell the governing body what to do. And that's absolutely right. The governing body has to use its wisdom and understanding to determine what needs to be done for the organization. It tells it's a governance of organizations. It's very much a focus on achieving the purpose of the organization, which really, I mean, that started with Larry Fink's letter back in 2019 about being purpose-driven organizations. That was what Larry Fink from BlackRock, the CEO of BlackRock, in his letter to the CEOs of the investees, was all about. It was one of the first ones around this moving into sustainability, was start with purpose. And that really comes through quite clearly in this definition of the governance of organizations. I know we've run out of time, but we do need to get into the definition of an organization, because that definition of organization is a hangover from ISO standards. It comes from the ISO terms and definitions. It's used throughout all the management system standards. So we had to work within this definition of organization, because that word is used in the title of the standard, is used in the definition of the governance of organizations, and we had to work with it. But we also had to understand that an organization can be an organization of organizations. So we had to come up with this concept of organizational entity. So we think about that in a holding company scenario. It could also be an organization, and the example provided was in the Caribbean, where we have a university, and then you have university campuses on islands that are miles apart. And they, for all intents and purposes, that campus is its own operating entity. It has a governing body that is actively governing, as opposed to it's just a subsidiary, it's just a business unit, but it has no legal standing, but the governing body is actually governing, which is really quite interesting. And I think that's something that we need to maybe raise at the next webinar.
I think this is a very important element, because if you think about how multinationals organize, and I know this is wider than multinationals, it's like different divisions are located in different areas, and they build their own almost like culture, right? But you want there to be a golden thread through the whole organization that works towards this purpose that's been adopted by the organization. So I see it says an organizational entity definition is organization that has a distinct and independent existence, which means it could be virtual.
Yes, Absolutely. Yes. And it was something that we had to take into consideration, is that entities and organization doesn't have to be legally incorporated. And we think about today's organizations that live on the internet. It's like murmurations of starlings. It comes, developers, coders come together, solve a problem, then dissipate again. It was an organism, an organization, when it was doing its piece of work, but it was never legally incorporated. It was to solve a problem. And we're getting more and more of that that's enabled through internet, remote working. And that's one of the benefits that's come out of COVID, is this ability to work globally at a much larger scale, and more acceptance around innovation, agility, fluidity of organizations. And it's something that we had to take into consideration way back in when we were developing the standard. And of course, 2021, when the standard came out, was right at the height of COVID. So we were absolutely in that mode.
I mean, if we can end up with a question to you and a question to Annamarie, is like, why would an organization start applying ISO 37000 to them? And I'm talking about organizations of all shapes and sizes. What do you think would be the benefit to them?
Well, it's a certainty of those governance outcomes. If you apply the principles of 37,000, you've got the conditions for good governance, and you're applying the principles of 37,000, the organization will win. And it wins by being able to be more effective in its performance, being able to be seen to be ethical and doing the right thing, and also to be that social conscience, to be responsibly stewarding its resources, be it the human resources, be it financial resources, be it the resources that go into its carbon resources, for example, in the use of energy. So those outcomes, why do you want to do ISO 37000? It's not to tick the box to comply with something else, because this is not compliance. If you apply these principles, it's like putting oil on the wheels of the organization. It's giving people certainty, clarity, decision-making, agility, innovation. That's what this is able to give you. You cannot treat this as red tape, because if you treat this as red tape, that's treating it as compliance, and that's not going to give you agility, innovation, all of those kinds of the oil on the wheels. You have to treat this as governance. And when you do governance right, and that's what we've tried to encapsulate in this document, when you do it right, your organization will fly. Maybe not your governing body, your organization will fly.
Okay, thanks so much for that, Carolynn.
Yeah, Rina, for me, and Carolynn was saying earlier on that ISO really focuses on kind of the organizational side. But at the end of the day, that legal person that she was referring to still needs a human person to give it a mind and a soul and a heart. So we really need a new kind of leadership. We need the kind of leadership that have moved on from the philosophies of the business of business is business, that really recognizes, like the Paul Polmans of Unilever and those kinds of individuals, that really realizes that if I kind of take that very single line approach, there is no sustainable future for this business. It is a short-sighted strategy. We are interdependent. We need one another. That the book of Paul Polmans, the subheading of the book Net Positive, that says how courageous companies flourish by giving more than they take. And that's the kind of strategy and leadership we need. And for me, from that perspective, it just therefore makes absolute it's a no-brainer that we need to, because governance gives you the framework within which to then also bring in the social, environmental kind of elements, into your strategy as well. So I don't know, I just always, to me, it's like, this is common sense, but it seems like common sense isn't always that common. So thanks.
Ladies, thanks so much for today. To all our attendees, we are going to roll out these webinars, and we're going to take a journey through ISO 37000 by looking at the different definitions, because then you understand what it means in the standard. And then it also will give some guidance on how this is practically applied. If you have at any point in time have done some practical application, please send me an email. We will send out my email address with the recording afterwards. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks for joining, and this has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. From underneath
Thanks
the
very
tree,
much.
me saying bye as well. Thanks. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.